Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Access Singapore 2020. My name is Jamie O, and I'll be your host today. Today's live talk show brought to you by the Tay Group. Unfortunately, the founder and creator of Access can't physically be with us today, but not to worry, we have him online virtually. Hi, Jeffrey. How are you doing?
Hi, Jamie. Thank you so much for hosting this show for us. I want to come to Singapore so badly. I did bought the ticket, but unfortunately, the air travel bubble canceled the last minute. Once again, thank you so much for hosting this show for us this year.
My pleasure. Tell us what the purpose of Access is.
Now, the purpose of Access is all about identity access management, but it's all about I founded this, or I created this for this particular communities because 5 years on, before that, we hosted a lot of cybersecurity event. And one of the elements of cybersecurity is all about preventing access, preventing unauthorized access, preventing unauthorized identity, that sort of thing. And after that, I spoke to a lot of executives that specialize in identity access management, privilege access. I realized that these communities play a vital role when it comes to data breach, play a vital role when it comes to IT infrastructure. So we created Access about 3 years ago. In Singapore, it's the first event that we hosted, then in Hong Kong, KL, and we brought it to Australia. And right now, it's a sizable community in the Asia Pacific that only focus on identity access management, privilege access, identity governance, etc. And it's also about zero trust, also about how to safeguard your identity and how to make sure the right access is given. All that will be featured in today's by speaker today, and will be hosted by you.
Thank you so much. Jeffrey, don't worry, the travel bubble will begin soon. I'm pretty sure very soon you'll be able to set foot on Singapore soil. Don't miss us so much, okay?
Great, thank you so much. Back to you, Jamie.
Thanks so much. So today on behalf of Tay Group, we are very proud to have built this community in Asia Pacific. As you probably noticed, today's Access Singapore format is fairly different from our previous Access events. We're broadcasting live from a studio in Singapore. We've done this for a few of events the past few weeks, and we hope to also host a bi-weekly talk show. We're very grateful with us today to have 4 industry experts from 3 well-known companies, which are Beyond Trust, SailPoint, and One Identity by Quest. Before we begin, I would like to thank each and every one of you who have taken the time away from your busy schedule to join us today. I promise you this session will be worth every minute of your time. Without further ado, let's begin with today's talk show.
Data theft and breaches are on the rise, prompting the introduction of global data privacy regulations to protect consumer, health, financial, and other sensitive information. Organizations across all industries now face the daunting task of addressing existing and future data privacy requirements that are still coming into effect across the globe. How can organizations effectively address all these regulations by protecting sensitive information and ensure compliance in an efficient and cost-effective manner? It all starts with access. By ensuring workers possess the least amount of access needed to do their job, you minimize the potential of data theft or breach. SailPoint Identity enables you to manage and control user access to sensitive information, no matter where it resides. SailPoint Predictive Identity uses the power of AI and machine learning to find where sensitive data is stored across complex and hybrid environments. Identify who has access, how that access was given, and who really should have access. Define and enforce access controls to protect who can access sensitive information. And monitor and detect anomalous user access activity to catch potential risk and help prevent a data breach. Discover why organizations across the globe trust in SailPoint to protect sensitive data and address their data privacy regulations with confidence. Get complete visibility of where sensitive information resides. Centrally manage and control all access. know when suspicious activity is detected, and generate audit-ready reports in minutes. SailPoint Predictive Identity helps you automate the protection of your sensitive data. It's time to move beyond human ability alone. It's time to embrace a strong foundation built upon AI-driven identity. It's time for SailPoint.
But first, a few housekeeping points to note. All attendees' lines are muted, as you know. And we want to thank you for all the questions that have come. We're going to do our best to represent your questions, but if we don't, you got to forgive us. But feel free to, give us your thoughts and your questions as well in the chat box provided, and we'll do our best to pass them along to our guests today. Join me in welcoming our first speaker for today, Ivan Lai, identity practitioner, SailPoint, who'll be kicking off our session. Ivan is an identity and access management security professional with over 12 years of experience in technical sales and identity management consulting. He's a trusted advisor on identity management architecture and deployment to customers, vendors, and systems integrators. Prior to joining SailPoint, he worked for RSA and IBM. Hi, Ivan.
Hi, Jamie.
Welcome to Access Singapore 2020.
Nice
Now,
to be
before we
here.
get into your session, we all know the hybrid work office environment is here to stay. Many organizations have resorted to over-providing users in their race to equip them with the access to collaboration tools they need to be productive. What are the risks associated with that, though?
Well, I guess, too much of everything is actually bad for you. So it's like in health, if you eat too much sugar, you run the risk of getting diabetes. Well, there's a fun
I
one.
wish that wasn't the case.
Me too, actually. Love my sweets. But of course, if you just in another example, right? If you have a house, right, that has probably 100 dolls and each one filled with different quantity of gold, jewelry, and so on and so forth, and you have a key that accesses 75 of them versus 15. So which one do you think will have a better or bigger impact, if it was lost? Naturally, it's the one with the 75 access, right? So if you look at it, if organization, in the name of productivity or even convenience, start over provisioning access rights to their employees, they unwittingly or unwillingly, will actually increase their risk surface, where attackers can actually abuse.
Now, before we get into your presentation, can you share with us what SailPoint is all about and what it offers?
SailPoint is a pioneer in identity governance. So back to my earlier example, we will actually help the homeowner understand which key grants access to which door. And of course, eventually which staff, employees, contractors, or even home members owns what key. Right, so once you have that visibility, you can actually make intelligent decision whether should you remove the key at the appropriate time to reduce your risk or grant access to increase productivity.
That's amazing what SailPoint can offer. Today, Ivan will be sharing on modernization of identity management, human-centric security for a digital world. Can't wait to get into it. Here's Ivan's presentation.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Right, welcome to Access Singapore. So today, I basically want to talk about how we should be looking at modernizing identity management, right? Because what we are seeing today are definitely tectonic shifts within the business environment itself. So from a business perspective, right, some of these trends that we are seeing on the screen here. So the first thing first will then be, I think nobody expected this pandemic, a year ago, right? Everybody will be probably planning for their December holidays, but now everybody is stuck in Singapore or, whichever countries you are in. So what this pandemic has brought about is, what we are seeing is inter or even intra countries' closure, right? There is driving an adoption for organization to adopt remote access solutions, right? Allowing people to work remotely. Right, this also further drives the explosion growth in SaaS or even cloud-based solutions. So we have actually seen, AWS or even Azure or GCP platform uptake rate increase for the past few years, right? And also drives mobile applications, I would say. Right, previously, we only are looking at millennials or even the baby boomers adopting them, but now you have governments coming out to actually run programs, right, or even help centers to actually help the elderly use mobile devices. So all this is driving a rapid, explosion in the number of apps organizations are using today. Right, so if you look at this report from Okta, it is based in 2019, so they actually look at their customers from a 2015 to 2018 range, right? What they are saying is customers with more than 2,000 employees, if you look at it, in the 3 years itself, right, saw an increase of almost 2 times the number of apps, right? They have actually grown from 77 to 129, the things that they are using. So besides apps, what happened will then be there's also an explosion in data, right? So the more apps you use, the more data you will generate. But if you take a step back, besides these 2 components, one thing for sure, if you buy an app, develop an app, what you want to do is to let people in. You want people to start using it. Right? So it also means there is an explosive growth in the number of digital identities an organization needs to manage. Right? So if you look at organizations with 2,000 or more employees from the previous report itself, you are actually looking at managing somewhere around 150,000 identities in 2015 to maybe 250,000 in 2018. So considering that, so if you do not actually manage your identity well, it basically means that it's another key that hackers can actually use to exploit against your organization. So is this what is happening? So next is this report from Verizon Data Breach. This is fresh out of the oven. I think it came out in June, if I'm not wrong, this year. Okay, again, the timeline is pretty similar. So what you see on the left is what is happening in 2015, and all the way to the right, that is on the 2020 itself. Right, so if you see there's a numbering on the side, which can be pretty small, so apologies for that, 1 to 8. What you realize is there is a significant drop in hacking breaches or breaches, right, that is based on malware, right? So they peaked around over 50% in 2015 and has since dropped to probably about 6.5% in 2015. So you see on the 2020, so you see on the right, there will be the bottom 3 of it, threat actions. But point to note here will be the human-related kind of incidents have actually risen. So what you see in 2015 has actually risen to the top 2, use of stolen credentials or even phishing. When it comes to phishing, right, what hackers actually love about is credentials. They want to divert your credentials. Once they have your credentials, they can actually easily enter the organization and use it as a springboard or move laterally within the organization IT infrastructure as well. So what we are coming to realize is more frequently, right, hackers tend to target users, right, for their digital identities to gain access to high-value systems and data while concealing the activities and movements, right, within the IT organization infrastructure, right? Because if I'm using a legitimate access, right, likelihood, system monitoring applications, SIEM solutions will not be able to detect my movement, right? So considering the number of digital identities organization need to manage, right? If you remember what I mentioned about, 250,000 easily, right? And the myriad of applications with varying levels of permissions. The number of connections or even endpoints can be going into the millions, right? And hackers knows that, humans are the one that basically gets into the applications. They are the one who's generate the data. So they will definitely be after those identities. So organization is thinking, is this enough, right? So the answer is definitely no. Existing controls, right, will not be sufficient. Why? Because it has radically changed. Today it is not so much about how many levels of firewall you have, right? Once you leave the confine of a secure premise, you go to a SaaS, you go to the cloud. There is no firewalls that is within your premise that will actually help secure your applications. You will be relying on the firewalls that is operated by the SaaS provider and things like that. So eventually, identity is basically the new firewall, right? So if you consider all these challenges, so what can we do to actually help organizations address this identity governance kind of problems? So first, let's take a step back. Look at how we have evolved identity and access management. So traditionally, identity and access management is really about securing and managing digital identity. So if you take the two words apart, right? So what it really means is we are looking at authentication and single sign-on. So basically, if I have access to the key, a key can open the door, I can go in. If this key can open 10 doors, I can go into 10 doors. Most organizations like this aspect of it, right? Why? Because it is convenient. It's the user experience part that sells a lot of times. So when they talk about managing is traditionally a service management kind of concept. Although vendors along the years have tried to make it sexy and throw in security ideas and things like that, but a lot of organizations buy IAM solutions to automatically create and remove accounts, like as though they are assets. So it is like using ServiceNow to add or remove assets. But if this is sufficient, right, then you won't have leading analysts, right, from Forrester or even Gartner coming out to say that in the world of distributed employees, where everybody can work anywhere, managing identity and access is the most important part of security. So this is a gap which everybody sees, but are we doing enough to address it? So let's look at what can be done. Here I have a circle with probably 7 smaller circles. We can see what we have as traditional IAM. Inside there, you will have your access management that covers authentication or even multi-factor authentication as we speak today using device biometrics to achieve single sign-on, as well as automated lifecycle management. But more importantly, we need to move to what we call identity security. So when we talk about identity security, you need to actually look at a few of other capabilities and features, right? Namely, I'm not going to go in sequence here, right? Things like compliance controls and certifications that help an organization implement continuous governance, right? It helps you keep clean. So you won't have all these challenges where, if I can use the Singapore government as an example, right? If you will be able to see that for the past couple of years, when the AGC report their findings on the gaps within the IT system itself, one thing always comes up, and that is basically users' accesses are not removed when they leave the organizations. So there isn't really a good certifications or compliance governance controls within the government. So we are also then looking at policies and role-based access controls. So when we talk about policies and role-based access control, it is important because managing 120, 150, or even 200 applications is difficult. Every applications have their own separation of duty policies, right? Have their own maker and checker policies. And sometimes if you have developed in-house applications, if the person who owns the project leaves the organization, what you are losing is knowledge about what are those policies, what are those controls that should be mutually exclusive. So using a central system to store and enforce all these policies will actually help you retain your knowledge of the applications. It helps prevent brain drain, right? Or even ensuring a consistent enforcement across all your applications, be it they are on the cloud or on premise itself. And lastly, if you want to look at things like making the complex simple, right? You want people to use it. So if you look at the Gartner Trends report, one of the key pillars is people centricity, where we talk about the user experience of things. And that is where we can actually use things like AI or even machine learning or what we call identity analytics, right? To make recommendations when users are making access requests or when we are doing certification, so as to take away certification fatigue, as what we call it. And the next one would then be cloud and data access governance. This is important because at the end of the day, we are seeing a rapid adoption of SaaS or even cloud-based computing environment. Having an understanding of what exists, what kind of assets, what kind of access rights you have within your cloud environments actually help you curtail all your risks, right? And data, everybody is after data. Data is the most important thing. And when you open up applications, while you can control who can get into the applications, a legitimate user will always be able to extract the data out from the system. So when that happens, the data sits in thumb drive, hard disk, file storage system, collaboration systems like SharePoint. How are you going to enforce consistent controls and policies when you do not know who has access to them? So what we are looking at will then be, work from anywhere, not only means self-service or even password management, right? At this point, organizations should be considering what is the next thing, right? It need not be a pandemic. It can be a natural disaster, right? Or it can be, who knows, terrorist attack, right? Nobody can say when is it going to happen, but surely something is going to happen, right? So the ability to centrally see, right, and control and manage change, have that propagate across all your systems, right? Whether they are in the secure premises, in your building, or in the cloud itself, is something important. And this cannot be accomplished, right, by basic controls, basic access management and authentication. Remember, identity governance, right, is the brains behind access management. And you need to have intelligent identity governance, right, in order for access to be granted or revoked in a timely manner. So the future of identity is here, right? Everyone in this room will still be a vital part of a predictive future. Generally speaking, AI, ML is here to stay. It's just when or how your organization is going to adopt it. So our roles may actually shift from something that is more administrative, right, trying to actually say I want to approve or remove access rights, right, to a mindset where it interprets data, right, and provides insights to make human and machine IGA world more intelligent. As you can see, there's a lot here that SailPoint Predictive Identity can help you with, regardless whether is it to automate secure access, adapt and automate your security policy so that it makes your business agile and move across SaaS, cloud, as well as on-premise solutions. And the most important part, fundamental, how do you actually keep and stay compliant? Continuous governance, so you can actually stay in complete control. So, my friends here, digital transformation and this pandemic, right, is changing the way we do business today. And with it, CIOs typically grapple with the security and compliance implications, as well as the challenge of automating processes to ensure users are productive. That's why SailPoint's fundamental belief is that in today's enterprise, identity is power. Right? We help customers address those challenges securely and confidently, so they can focus on growing and innovating. It is time to rethink your identity strategy and journey. Are you ready for it? Thank you.
Thanks for the really great presentation, Ivan. Now we have a few questions from the audience. You ready for that?
Yeah.
Okay,
sure.
your first question is, does it mean that changing to a newer identity management solution will address the identity governance related challenges, and what other things should we look out for?
I guess, using newer technology is just but one side of a coin. You also have to look at, your internal processes as well as policies, right? Are they keeping up with times? Often what we realize is organizations do not renew or review those policies. They are still using new technologies with outdated policies and processes, which makes it cumbersome. So I think that is something, organizations should bear in mind before embarking on their identity journey.
Okay, next question. Do you recommend using a SaaS or on-premise solution to govern identities given today's business climates?
If you look at it, right, 1 year ago, I don't think I'll be here in this studio doing a recording. If no, I guess everybody will understand this, right? You will be up in the stage and then doing some presentation. So the pandemic actually changes not just how we operate, but as human beings, right? But even the business itself. So I would say from this end, a lot of organizations will be looking at SaaS deployment as a strategy moving forward. Definitely in that context, because at the end of the day, it gives them the ability to have somewhat a location independent or resilient delivery of their software services, right? But what works or what doesn't work entails proper planning. So even if you look at the on-premise solution, it has its benefits. So an organization will actually need to choose one that will actually help them realize their potential and allows them to move freely between the two if possible.
Thanks so much, Ivan. Ladies and gentlemen, Ivan Lai from SailPoint. Next up, another interesting presentation, this time from Beyond Trust. We need a few minutes though to reset the studio for our next guest, so stay with us.
Most critical cybersecurity breaches involve the exploitation of improperly managed privileges that attackers use to infiltrate and move laterally across networks. The number of privileges across your environment is constantly expanding. So how can you protect your organization from this explosion of privileges? It requires going beyond just securing passwords to a modern approach that secures every user, session, and asset across your enterprise. The Beyond Trust Universal Privilege Management model secures and manages privileges across your entire landscape. The Beyond Trust platform enables 3 integrated solutions that drastically reduce your attack surface and windows of exposure while boosting business productivity. Privileged Password Management helps you discover, onboard, manage, and audit every privileged account, both human and non-human, and track every session. Endpoint Privilege Management grants the right privilege to the right user or application, just for the time it's needed. Secure Remote Access enables you to manage and audit privileged remote access for employees and vendors. Universal Privilege Management from Beyond Trust gives you absolute control over every privilege in your environment. Go beyond the password to secure your entire universe of privileges today. Visit beyondtrust.com to learn more.
Without further ado, let's get on with our next session. Join me in welcoming Ajay Kumar, Director for Solutions Engineering, Beyond Trust. Ajay Kumar has over 15 years experience in cybersecurity and 7 specializing in privileged access and identity access management. At Beyond Trust, Mr. Kumar heads the Regional Security Engineering Department, helping enterprises and government agencies improve their security posture against internal and external threats. Welcome, Ajay. Thanks very much for joining us today.
My pleasure to be here today.
Now, let's first talk about this new norm. Everybody's talking about a new norm imposed by COVID-19. In your opinion, what's the biggest impact of COVID-19 on cybersecurity operations?
Yeah, I think COVID-19 took everyone by surprise. The first 2 months was just keeping lights on, and people just hoped that it would go away. But now we are moved to a new way of working, where most of the people are working away from home. Enterprise forever had a concept of a perimeter that they used to protect their assets. Now they've realized that the people as well as assets are working outside of their enterprise. I think this is the biggest change that they had to take care of. And the attackers have learned this. Since the beginning of COVID-19, the amount of attacks specifically targeting the remote workers has gone up 300 times. And that's what they have to deal with on a day-on-day basis today.
Now, endpoint privilege management helps to protect against any unknown threats that take advantage of unmanned local admin access. With COVID, most employees are working from home. Does endpoint privilege management solution work when disconnected from enterprise network?
Absolutely. So one of the big challenges that most enterprise face today is that employees are sitting at home, and once they're sitting at home, they're outside of the secure cocoon of their enterprise, right? The traditional firewalls and the other protective measures that used to protect them are no longer there. They're connecting to their home Wi-Fi and then onto the internet and maybe onto the computer network, right? And this brings a big challenge. A lot of times when they're working, they may not be connected to the enterprise network. And any solution that depends on that connectivity, right, is just not going to work. Now, enterprise privilege management, helps you mitigate that threat. It's an agent-based solution that sits on your computer or laptop, and once, regardless of whether you're connected to the enterprise or whether you're disconnected, it helps secure. And what it does is it ensures that the right privileges are always made available to the user, so it's productive. At the same time, malicious element or malware actors cannot take advantages of privileges inherent to the user and attack or get into the enterprise.
Now, how does just-in-time elevation help organizations reduce their risk of attacks?
Okay. Now, just-in-time is a very interesting concept, right? It was first brought in for the manufacturing industry. The idea is you do not need, a lot of stock sitting in your warehouses, whereas, you're just going to use it for production maybe 1 month or 2 months down the line. Now, the same concept can be applied to privileges, user IDs that users use, right? You may not require to use a server all the time. You may just require it maybe once in a week for doing a specific task. What just-in-time elevation does is that grants you that privilege to access that server just when you need that access. Now, this allows you to be productive, access and do your day-to-day task, but at the same time, if any attacker gets access to your computer or your laptop or maybe even to your ID, he cannot misuse that ID because that's not turned down, right? It's policy-driven, not individual ID or user ID-driven.
Now, most organizations have invested in endpoint security solutions. Why should they go with additional solutions like endpoint privilege management, for example?
Absolutely. I think that's a very common question that I get from a lot of my customers, right? And as you're aware, any computer has already a lot of security software installed on it, right? You have your antivirus, you have anti-malware, you maybe have a patch management software, you have your endpoint, detection and response software. Now, with all this software, people think that one more solution is just an issue. Now, what we do is we attack this problem from the other end, right? Where traditional software think about detecting a malware and then stopping it. What we do is we stop the malware, even if it is there on the laptop, from taking advantages of the privileges that it requires to take control of that laptop and then gain access to the network, right? So we complement your traditional solutions very well. So whereas your traditional solution may miss because the signature has not been updated or the attack is fairly new, but once the malware is on your computer, it requires certain privileges, right? Maybe to do things like shut down your firewall, maybe to turn off the security measures that are already. And these privileges are what we control. And by ensuring control of these privileges, we can ensure that the malware cannot abuse it for gaining access to the laptop or for the rest of the network resources.
I'm seeing many organizations move towards Apple laptops. Can endpoint privilege management help them secure their MacBooks?
Absolutely. From your smile, I see you are a MacBook user as well,
Yeah.
right? And MacBooks has become traditionally much more popular in the enterprise in the last couple of years. And especially if you have power users or you have senior executives, they tend to use a MacBook. And since MacBooks are something that is traditionally not been protected, right? Always you thought that Linux and MacBooks were not something that required security. These were not given the importance that they were. And they have become attackers' new target. More so because privileged users or specific, high value executives are now using these laptops. Now, we focus across the entire environment, not only on your Windows laptop, but also in your MacBooks and on your Unix environment as well. So we ensure that this privilege management or least privilege management policy is applied consistently across your entire environment.
Okay, thank you very much, Ajay, for all that. Let's not wait any longer. The topic of Ajay's presentation today is just-in-time privileged access, the next big step in risk reduction. Let's have a look at the presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Jamie. Hello, everyone. I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes talking about just-in-time privilege access and why it's the next step in risk reduction. Now, let's understand the impact of privilege abuse. Regardless of whether you are any hacker trying to get into an enterprise or a malicious insider trying to escalate your privileges, the first thing that you need to establish yourself is privilege accounts. Now, these privilege accounts are accounts that are like root or Windows administrator or network administrator that come with special privileges. These users have the ability to create new users, modify users, change settings in a computer, maybe shut down the firewall. And this is why the attackers are specifically targeting this. Now let's look at some of the statistics that we have seen over the last couple of years. Around 90% of the vulnerabilities are associated with excess admin privileges. So it basically means that the attacker just leverages attack or privileges that users have over and above that they require to carry out their day-to-day task, right? The other part is that 62% of the enterprise are still struggling to track privilege access. And what that means is that a user who once is given this access rarely has it taken away. So you have a lot of employees who are floating around with all the access that they just do not need to carry out the day-to-day task. And all these are exactly used by attackers to get into your endpoints and then onto your network. Now let's see how this works. Now this can be a global threat actor or typically can be an insider as well. One of the first things that it tries to do is compromise an always-on account. When I say an always-on account, an account once created is rarely disabled. It's always available. So regardless of whether a user is actually using it to carry out his day-to-day task or maybe he requires it once in a month, the account once created is made available to that user at any given point of time. Unfortunately, that account is also now available to any attacker. Once he has gained access to that always-on account, he then tries to escalate his privilege. And this is trying to get into an administrative or a root account within the endpoint. And then he goes on through a series of techniques by which he escalates his privilege on that endpoint and then on to try to escalate it to other endpoints laterally and then on to maybe some critical server or critical host having some information. Now what are these always-on accounts? Now always-on accounts are accounts that are always kept enabled, right? I create an account, it is made available from the time a user joins the organization till the time a user leaves the organization. More often than not, his privileges just tend to grow over a period that he is in the organization. These can always be used to carry out a privileged task, regardless of when the user actually needs it, so that this is always open to abuse. Now Gartner says that this specific vulnerability is going to be something that organizations are going to address. Around 50% of the organizations by 2024 will have implemented just-in-time access. And that way, they will actually reduce the exposure to attacks by around 80%. Now, what does just-in-time and how does this just-in-time privilege access management work? Right? The key aspect that you need to understand is what triggers off a just-in-time. Now, this can be a workflow, a user requesting for a specific access. It can be a context, a user specifically logging onto a device using a multi-factor, or specifically requesting or having a specific access to a account. It can be entitlements granted just in the point of request, or it can be multi-factor authentication that the user has used, which again triggers off additional privileges. Now, once you have these triggers, the next question is, how is privileged access management system delivering this to the user? Now, these can be in terms of just-in-time privileges that are added to his account. It can be in terms of tokenization, a very powerful technique where a token is issued to the application so that it can carry out the privileged task just at that instant. It can be through creating of accounts just in time and then deletion when it is no longer required. So these creates its own complexity. It can be through adding a member to a privileged group and then withdrawing him the second the task is completed. And it can be through impersonation, something that is frequently done in the Unix world through what we call as sudo or through SU user. And last, it can be through what we call as disabled user. So user accesses an account, uses it for carrying out his task, and once his task is completed, that account is disabled. So this gives a series of methods that a user or an organization can use for implementing just in time. Now what would happen is all of these depends on core policies. Now these policies can depend on the time and date. For example, a worker who only needs access between 9 and 5, it would have this access provided only during that duration. It can be maybe you can have certain policies withdrawn in case you have incident of compromise. You can also have it tied up with your ticketing system, a very popular mechanism by which a ticket that has been raised in your ITSM system would immediately allow a user to gain access by just quoting that number and showing the status of that specific ticket as approved. And then on, you can always have other mechanisms such as manipulations or creation and deletions of account. Now, anytime this misuse is detected, you can always have the privileges removed in real time by having periodic access certification, which validates whether a user needs continued access to these accounts, and of course through regular process of auditing and reporting. And once your privileges are recorded, you always have mechanisms such as session monitoring and keystroke logging to investigate and for any further forensics as required. Now, why does every business require just-in-time PAM, right? And I'm just going to talk about 3 specific use cases here. Think about privileged remote access. A recent study has said that around 32% of the organizations enterprise globally are vulnerable to access or misuse by one of their vendors. So basically it says that if the vendor is compromised, the chances of the enterprise being compromised are also very high. Similarly, applying the concept of just-in-time to vendor access, especially from a remote environment, brings a lot of benefit to the enterprise. The second is DevOps. Now you have a scenario where a developer needs constant access to production environments as well as a lot of other servers. Just the reason because you're now gone into a DevOps mode where in a task a user or a developer needs to not only carry out certain tasks that developers know, but is also responsible for certain troubleshooting or may require access to production servers. In this case, applying just-in-time or time-restricted accounts, narrows your big attack vector or attack vulnerability that an attacker can use. The last is end-user privileged tasks. In today's environment where you have users sitting at home, you may require him to carry out various tasks that traditionally require admin tasks. And this can be as simple as having to change the network ID, or it can be as having to change or install a program. And this leads to call to an help desk, and with help desk already overloaded, most organizations tend to take the easy way out, is giving the admin access onto these users, which again can be abused not only by the user but also by any attacker who then gains access. In all of the scenarios, applying the concept of just-in-time allows the user to be productive at the same time ensuring organization or enterprise security. Now with that, let me just talk about how BeyondTrust implements these just-in-time policies across its portfolio. Now we look at privileged access management in terms of these 3 critical pillars. The privileged password management focuses on your privileged users. These are the users who are responsible for managing your crown jewels, your servers, and the critical assets that contain your information. These ensure that access is granted through a secure mechanism, and any access is mentioned, the session that the administrator has is then monitored for any kind of misuse, and you can then terminate it in almost real time. The endpoint privilege management helps secure it from the end user perspective. So an end user who requires additional privileges, rather than having to go on and ask these privileges or having to be given admin privileges, ends up just having a policy-based assertion that allows him to carry out an installation or maybe carry out a reconfiguration as required without having to be given admin privileges. This reduces the big attack surface or big attack weakness that most enterprises have, especially when you're looking at remote working. The third part, again critical in today's time, is secure remote access. You today have your privileged users, your administrators accessing from a remote location, and if they're using a home, a BYOD device, or if they're using a laptop at home, the tendency, or which may be compromised or which is more susceptible to attack outside your enterprise network. Secure remote access provides you the best-in-host solution, so that it provides an air gap or a gap between your enterprise network and the user. So this ensures that even if a malware infection on the user's home network, it does not then move over to your enterprise network. At the same time, you have complete auditability and visibility into all the activities carried out by the user, and the ability to then inject passwords just in time. All of this is seamlessly managed through the Beyond Insight platform that gives you one single glass of pane to monitor and set policies, and then audit these users. With this, I would invite you to please go down to our website, and the link that has been provided, where you can register for a free copy of the Identity Attack Vectors, which has been written, authored by Maury J. Haber, our CTO. With that, I thank you for your time, and I welcome you to visit our website, where you can see a lot of collateral, additional white papers, and also have interactive demos that can be viewed by you for your further benefit. With that, I thank you again for your time, and I believe there are some questions that need to be answered. So let me just step back to Jamie and take this question for you.
That was an insightful presentation. Thanks very much, Ajay.
My pleasure.
And now we have some questions from the audience. The first question is, how quickly can my team deploy the endpoint privilege management solution?
Yeah, I think with COVID-19, everyone is in an urgency to get that solution rolled out as soon as possible. Now, the answer to that is very, very quickly. Now, we provide you a mechanism to deploy this on-prem, or in today's times, more relevant, on the cloud, or as a SaaS or as a cloud solution. So this allows you to deploy the solution very quickly, and also then push the agents that are required across your entire environment using your standard deployment tools. So we have customers who can deploy the solution in a matter of weeks. Now, in addition to this, the second challenge that most enterprises face is, how do you ensure that the policies are tuned to meet your various employees and their working behavior, which can be quite varied. In our case, we provide you with a quick start policy that allows you to quickly fine-tune and deploy these policies right on day one, and then fine-tune it as go on. So we avoid having the huge period that, the learning period of trying to understand the user's behavior and then constantly having to fine-tune policies. So this means that both the deployment and the policy rollout can happen in a matter of weeks.
Thanks for that, Ajay. The next question is, does endpoint privilege management replace my antivirus or anti-malware solution?
Okay, again, a very common question, right? Like I said, most enterprises have more than one security solution already deployed on your endpoint, and typically it can be an anti-malware or an antivirus solution. Now, the idea behind having an endpoint privilege management solution is to complement these solutions. So whereas antivirus and anti-malware work by detecting a signature-based or a certain behavior and then blocking it, what endpoint privilege management does is it blocks access to the privileges that is required by this malware to gain access to the laptop, or then on to escalate it to the rest of your enterprise network.
Okay, another question. In these times of COVID-19 where my teams are working from home, can endpoint privilege management be deployed remotely, or does my team need to be on the premises to install it?
Okay, so I think earlier question I said that it's available as an on-cloud solution, which means that you can quickly spin it up and deploy it quickly across your enterprise. So you do not need to have access to your enterprise network or have to deploy any software there. The bigger advantage that you get by deploying an endpoint privilege management is that it streamlines your entire privilege management. So in that, the users who are working at home frequently require additional privileges. They end up calling your help desk. Now, by a matter of policy, you can ensure that the user has the right privileges to carry out his task productively without having to frequently reach out to the help desk. So this streamlines the worker's user behavior as well as ensures that it's productive as well.
Okay, we have just enough time for another question.
Yeah.
Can you explain more about just-in-time elevation?
Okay. So just-in-time is a very interesting idea, right? Research after research has shown that privilege escalation is what most of the attackers use to get access to the endpoint, right? Now, and this privilege escalation is possible because of what we call as always-on accounts. Now, these accounts are created with all the privileges and then is always available either to the user or, in this case, the laptop is compromised to the attacker as well. What just-in-time does is it sees the context of the request as well as the policy surrounding that particular request, and only then allows a user to gain access to that particular resource or ID, right? So this ensures that the time that is available for escalation is very limited, and thereby helps the protection helps better protect the endpoint.
Thank you so much, Ajay, for this wonderful session.
My pleasure, Jamie, as always.
As usual, we need a few minutes to reset the studio, so Eddie will be joining us in a little bit. Thanks very much for your patience.
Change. It is the only constant. Whether it is new threats or new technologies, change is always barreling down on your organization. It feeds our pursuit of new capabilities and reaching a new set of customers, expanding partnerships, or, most importantly, beating the competition. How you deal with and control change is up to you. Many risks will arise from the decisions you make, the partners you choose, and others who join you along the way, some of whom may not always have the best intentions. As with any ongoing journey, you need to have a flexible plan that can adjust to changes, unforeseen events, and new threats. Most importantly, you need to make security the center of your plan. And security starts with identity. One identity. You need to ensure that the right people have the right access to the right resources in the right ways and at the right time. Finally, for audits and compliance, you will need to prove that all of that is done right. To ensure your organization can achieve an identity-centered security stance, we offer our comprehensive integrated portfolio of identity solutions for identity governance and administration, privileged access management, and AD account lifecycle management. Regardless of how you deal with change or wherever you are on your journey to deploy new capabilities and move to the cloud, One Identity can help your organization dramatically improve security, simplify management of accounts and identities and users, lock down the high-risk privileged accounts and administrative users, wrap governance around the whole thing. On-prem, cloud, or a hybrid environment, you can be secure and keep your users productive and achieve your business objectives. One Identity provides IGA and PAM for the things that matter most to you: legacy systems, AD, cloud systems, and beyond. We have helped companies from every industry and every region be successful. We've been recognized as industry leaders. Learn why you should make One Identity a partner on your security journey, and how we can help you place identity at the center of your security program, right where it should be.
Hi Eddie, welcome to today's session. Before we get into Sekan's presentation, tell us a little bit about One Identity by Quest and its offerings.
Okay. One Identity is a Quest company, and we created that branding specifically for our user-centric or identity-centric approach to managing the security of our enterprise customers. In terms of managing it, of course, there are the disciplines that we cover are identity governance and administration, as well as privileged access management. But on top of that, what's very unique about Quest is we also offer things that covers the hybrid cloud environment. That means we cover AD management from on-premise as well as on the cloud in a one consistent way of managing and securing that environment. In addition, we also cover the endpoint security aspects of an enterprise because that presents a very large attack surface where people can use that as an attack penetration point into the enterprise, as well as in case they do get compromised and there is a breach and they're held ransom, we are able to help them recover quickly. Now, if you look at our company tagline, it says, where next meets now. Okay, what does that mean? What basically it means is today we are in an environment where things change very fast. That's the only constant that we face today. And if you take COVID-19, people had to adapt to that change very quickly to remain viable as a business. So what we help enterprise do is to help them modernize, manage, as well as secure their environment as they tackle the changes that's coming to them, where they need to fix it now for the next challenge that they face. Yeah, thank you.
We'll get more insights from you in just a bit. We're going to open the floor to some questions and we're going to grill you on more stuff. But in the meantime, thanks very much for that. Presenting today for this session will be Sekhan Sitin, Technical Director, One Identity APJ. He's going to be live with us virtually from Australia. Sekhan Sitin, the Technical Director for One Identity APJ, has been with One Identity for over 8 years, and he has helped clients in APJ across a wide range of industries to solve their complex IAM challenges. Today, Sekhan will be presenting on work from home is now the norm, but are your most critical digital assets ready? Without further ado, let's get right into the presentation.
Hi, thank you, Jamie. Hi, I'm Sekhan Sitin. I'm the Technical Director for One Identity in APJ. This is a quick introduction. I've been specializing in the identity and access management around in this part of technology and cybersecurity for well over 10 years now, probably closer to 15 years now, and worked with various organizations across within the Asia Pacific region, both within Australia, but also throughout Asia as well. Really, what we're going to talk about in today's session is just going to go through with some of the impacts that we've had as part of this pandemic, but also just the challenges that we've had to experience and how our use of how technology has evolved firstly, but also how our use of technology has also evolved as part of this as well. Before we really get into it though, let's just start with just a short moment just to think about what normal looked like for your company before the pandemic had started. And really in thinking about that, think about it from the perspective of with your employees, what percentage of your employees would you say were actually remote before we started in the pandemic? Was that 5 or 10%? Or in some cases, many organizations, it was none, right? A lot of companies were actually purely based within an on-premises or within an office environment. And fast forward to today, where we are right now, from 6 months from there to where we are right now, many organizations, actually, we just released a survey earlier this month where the respondents reported that 99% of their employees, of their entire workforce, was now completely remote. So throughout this session, we're going to look at some of the challenges and how that's impacted different organizations, or how that's impacted all of us, but also how that's impacted the use of the technology as well. But firstly, though, let's just quickly start with computer viruses. So computer viruses it's a piece of code, which is designed to do something malicious onto the system, right? It's been around for a long time, and we use technologies like antivirus programs, for instance, to protect the computer system and to protect the applications and the assets and the data. So the risk of a computer system being impacted by a computer virus is not something that's new. And the risk of a human being impacted by a virus is not new either. We've faced various pandemics and various virus outbreaks historically, in the past that we've dealt with. But really, this is the first time that a human virus has had such a great impact on the way that we use technology globally, right? Regardless of which industry, which sector that the organization happened to be in. So this concept of a single virus having such a great impact on our lives and on technology is something which is quite new. Well, for starters, when you think about it, we're all working from home right now, and that's been a great impact to the way that we work, the way that we live, but also to the use of our technology. In the office, you would have had access to your applications and data while you're connected to your corporate network, which would have been available within your office premises, like your Wi-Fi and your Ethernet networks, for instance. But now we're at home and we're accessing those same applications and those data from our homes via the internet, from wherever we are. But the reality for a lot of people is actually a little bit more like this image here. And this is a photo of my son taken about 6 months ago when we first transitioned to working from home, where he decided to jump on my laptop and do a couple of his own drawings. The reality for organizations is that it's all their employees and their privileged users who are working from as well. So the people that we entrust to protect and secure our environments and our application and data are also facing the same type of challenges in having to work from home, in having to balance different aspects. Now, when we talk about privileged users, by the way, what is really your understanding or definition of privileged users? Is it just administration or admin type users for you? Really, have you considered business users into that as well? What I mean is, when we talk about privileged users, a lot of people generally think it's just the administration or administrative type user accounts that should be privileged. But really, when you think about it, you also have business user accounts or business users who have accounts within your applications and your systems who also have various degrees or various levels of privileges within your applications and within your data and systems. So a privileged user really isn't just restricted to an IT administrator. It could be anybody within your organization, from a senior executive right through to the IT administrator or to your outsourcers and your service providers. These are really the types of users would be at the higher risk of being a target for a potential attacker. Like I was saying, right now we can effectively be anywhere in the world, connecting back into our corporate networks and our applications. But for many organizations to actually enable this, to make this to happen, they had to make some rapid changes to their IT environments and to their net landscapes and to all their applications and systems to be able to support this, to be able to allow for their employees to move back into their homes and still be connected back into the office, back into the applications to gain access to the data and do what they need to do as part of their job. Just like I was talking about earlier, we published a survey earlier this month. And one of the questions that we asked the respondents is about the changes that their organizations had to implement and how that's impacted their organizations. One of the findings that came from that survey is 39% of the respondents said that security suffered as a result of these changes. Now, that could have been anything from having to relax certain security policies and having to ease some of the security restrictions, right through to having to taking some shortcuts along the way just to really get the job done, right? Just to get our employees safe. And really, everything has become much more connected in today's world, from various smart devices, all the way connecting back into our enterprise environments. An interesting piece that I came across recently, which you may or may not have seen, is it was a document that talks about the dimensions of warfare, right? And the traditional dimensions of warfare that we're talking about is land, sea, air, and space. But now it was adding a fifth dimension into that, being the cyberspace or the information dimension. So with everything being much more connected, you can see how they're drawing that type of description into there as well. Just recently, back in June, actually, Australia came under, or various political and private sector organizations throughout Australia came under a cyber attack. The Australian government actually called it a sophisticated state-based cyber actor. And both the government and our Prime Minister was speaking about this publicly, not really to raise concerns or raise alarms, but more to bring awareness to the issue. Bring awareness to the public that cybersecurity is important. both from an individual, but also for corporates, for various organizations, and for government and critical infrastructure, to make sure that they implement cybersecurity strategies and technologies to be better protected, to protect themselves and defend their environments. As part of that, in Australian government, there's one of the departments, the ACSC, they publish what they call the Essential 8 mitigation strategies, right? Which really covers things from, strategies such as application control to patching, hardening, backups, including things like multi-factor authentication. And one of them is about restricting and managing administration privileges. So these Essential 8 mitigation strategies help to protect and defend against cyber incidents. It's definitely worthwhile reading up further on, so definitely look into that. It's the ACSC, Essential 8. One of the other things that they also publish is various guidelines on how to manage and how to handle cyber incidents. For instance, in one of the guidelines, they talk about maintaining an accurate diagram of your operations network, as in accurate to this day, right? And making sure that you have a complete disconnect plan in the case that you ever need to use it. So having these type of guidelines and these mitigation strategies actually helped, these were instrumental in managing the cyber incidents that organizations faced. So at the beginning of this, we talked a little bit about how a single virus has affected both humans and technology. There's another part to this as well that we can draw some similarities, and that is that both technology and the users are now virtual. Now, what I mean by that is, in computing, we've had virtualization for some, so, virtualized environments, using things like hypervisors, cloud infrastructures, and so on. So these are very commonplace today, right? But what we're seeing now is a lot more is how the users are also becoming virtual. And what we mean by that is, for example, using things like technology, using virtual users to be able to support different initiatives that organizations have, such as providing e-government services back to citizens. So digital government services and digital government experiences back to the citizen to make different services and resources more easily accessible for the citizen. Obviously, that will reduce things like wait times and will provide that much faster access to the citizen who requires that information. So when we're talking about virtual users, you might be thinking a little bit about AI at this point, and you might be thinking a little bit about bots. And you've probably, right now you're probably thinking about that usual monotone robotic voice, right? I'm sure everyone's probably received a phone call from a bot like this, claiming to be from a government agency, whether it be an audit that you need to provide some details. But let me just change your thinking there for a second. So how do you really know if you were speaking to an artificial intelligence or to a human? And in thinking about that, consider this case that happened back in March in 2019, where a group of criminals, they used artificial intelligence to impersonate the chief executive, their voice of the chief executive, and demand a fraudulent transfer of 220,000 euros. Right? The victim of this attack was actually the CEO of the subsidiary energy company. And he reported actually even recognizing his boss's slight German accent that came through, and even the melody of his voice that came through on the phone. So when you think about it, in this case, an AI actually successfully executed a social engineering attack, right? This could potentially have been the first attack that was executed in this way, using AI to conduct, a social engineering attack, which is something that generally would expect a human to do, or a real user to do behind that. This could have been the first instance behind it, or potentially it could have been the first one that has been reported as well, right? So where am I going with all this? This is the reality that we live in. This is the new norm in which we all live. It's the way that we will work and we will travel, socialize. And it's the way that our technology has changed, and it will probably continue to change as this continues to evolve. And really using the processes using those processes or the methodologies that we implemented 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or even 1 year ago is probably not sufficient anymore to cater to the way that our world around us has changed. Whether it be as a result of the pandemic or the result of the next disruption. A couple of years back was digital transformation, for instance, that caused a lot of disruption, and it still does for many organizations. So really, organizations need to be asking themselves right now, how does their current processes, their current technologies, their current strategies actually support their business today? Is it effective in supporting their business today? But how will it, and more importantly, can it continue to support their businesses into the future? Right. So being adaptable, being flexible in that it's still still a solid framework that will support the organization, that will keep the organization secure, but also having that flexibility and that adaptability to be able to maintain, to be able to keep up as we continue to evolve and change. Now, one of the things that we need to be rethinking as part of that when we're talking about cybersecurity is also to be thinking about how it impacts the user. Right. And quite often security was seen as like a bit of a barrier, causing a lot of friction between the end user's experience and having to keep the organization secure. So in many cases, it was a bit of a balancing act, trying to provide solutions or services to the employees, to the users, which were usable, but also secure at the same time. Organizations really need to be rethinking that type of approach, but really moving towards more of like a frictionless user experience, whilst making sure that their environments and applications are secure, but also not impacting the usability or the user experience, from an end user perspective. And really taking an identity-centric approach to all of that is right at the center. It's, you're not only you're implementing tighter controls and the governance at the identity, and you got to remember that the identity could be anything really, from a standard privileged account to, an employee, a contractor, a service provider, a third party, or, even human and non-human, right? When we consider AI, bots, and RPA, for instance, as part of this. So it's about putting those type of controls, the governance processes at that identity level, because really that's probably the only thing right now that's being very consistent, in that it's still a person, it's still the machine or the service or the bot or the AI that's interacting with those systems, regardless of where they're interacting with it from. And as part of that, really, organizations need to be considering what we call connected identity solutions. So as part of connected identity solutions, one of the things to break away from is having to treat these in silos, right? And actually having that connection between the identity governance and administration as part of these type of solutions, as part of these, right, having IGA and the privilege access management actually combined to provide that whole identity-centric, that connected identity experience across the organization, regardless of what type of identity that we need to secure, which type of application that we need to protect. And at the very least, it's actually important to recognize that Active Directory is one of the mission-critical applications or technologies for any organization, regardless of their size, what type of industry that they're in. So looking at practices on how those systems were maintained and the processes that were used to maintain those systems is something that's important for organizations. Using those processes that were defined 10 years ago or 15 years ago are not as relevant in today's organizations, and really need to be taking that more of an identity-centric approach to implementing things like least privilege and zero trust type frameworks, but also removing those unnecessary level of privileges from the identity. That enables organizations to not only secure the person, but also making sure that their applications and data continue to remain secure, regardless of where the user is accessing those from, whether it be from their homes or when they come back in through their offices. So with that, thank you for attending our session today. Feel free to jump onto our website at oneidentity.com if you need any more information.
Thanks for that interesting and informative presentation, Serkan. Eddie, back to you. We've got a few questions from the floor, so I'm going to go right ahead with the first one. In your view, okay, what was the most common response enterprises took to ensure business continues, and also what security practices were overlooked?
Okay, that's an interesting question. Nobody expected this COVID-19. So when the
Nobody.
first thing that happened was everybody just sat back until the lockdown was announced. Then everybody still sat back.
I think people
and-
were in shock.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were in shock and they said, oh, good, let's see what happens. And then when it was announced to further extend, then people were in panic mode because they know they cannot sustain their business that way. So a lot of people jumped into new tech that they have never explored before. And we did a survey with IDC recently, and it was surprising, that a lot of the companies are willing to take more risks and have those technologies to continue with the business. So in peacetime, everybody talks about security, but in panic mode, everybody went for the business. So one of the things that they overlooked when doing this enablement of their business was a lot of them, even for communicating with customers, they adopted things like Zoom at a time when Zoom was still known and announced to have vulnerabilities. So that is the position that many enterprises have to take to remain viable. So in that process, the other aspects that they did was, as people needed to access information, they granted access on the fly. There was little governance because the most important thing was to get the business going, and they went and provisioned. So a lot of these things happened just to get through the day. And in that process, there were a lot of over-provision of access control. And this is now carried over for months, almost to a year. And it's going to be a concern when they come back. How are they going to manage the provisioning? And bear in mind, people working from home are also accessing other applications which could expose them to a cybersecurity threat. So I think that is one of the major problems that people face. And the other thing, it was there was a lot of enterprises that started redeploying people, like SQ, right? They deployed people to become health ambassadors and all that. A lot of roles changed. A lot of companies redeployed people, furloughed people. And in that process, the IT part could not handle the identity management to make sure that people do not still get access, or their access have been expanded, but there's no way to recall these roles that they were given when the time comes. So I think these are the things that are of concern during this period, that they could have done better if they had an IGA solution in place.
Well answered. Thanks very much for that. The next question, in your opinion, what can enterprises do to better manage their security posture, considering the COVID situation and how first of all it might continue, or there might be another wave, or there might be maybe another virus in the future. Who knows, right?
Exactly, right. I mean, this COVID-19 is there's worldwide attention, so everybody knew how to respond, or rather, they all responded as a global effort. Prior to that, there was, I think if you look back in history, there was the influenza beat affected certain countries, and everybody carried on as per normal, right? It doesn't affect you. So the next wave is very likely because virus mutate. So what they could do better is, first thing is, people already have got firewalls, VPNs, and all those things that are in place. But yet, you still hear news of people being compromised and prone to cyber attack, right? Like recently, it was the Lazada,
Red Mart, right?
Red Mart and all that, right? So all these solutions we know are in place. They are necessary, but they are not complete. Right? This is a new world now. So Quest has focused, or One Identity has focused on a credential-centric approach. So this is one of the new parameters that we want the industry to adopt, because number one, if you look at all the compromises, even the SingHealth one, it has always been a misuse of identity, right? Someone found an identity or an ID sitting in the system that is rogue. Someone used it, left it with default passwords. So I think if people put in another gate where the security is focused on credential protection and management, it will definitely help prepare them better for the next one. The next next attack.
I want to say touch wood, but
yeah, it will
it's
always
very
come.
real.
Yeah, it's very real, right? So if on top of that, the IGA solution, what it does is also help companies help them do change of roles. They can do it very automated, very controlled manner, and then when they want to revert, they can always in the same way revert them in a very controlled manner. So it's not a haphazard, you ask for it, I'll give it to you because it's an emergency. So it's all controlled with workflows and controls. So that's one area they can do better, definitely.
Now, the third question is, what are some of the tips to help enterprises transition back to the office as the COVID-19 situation seems to be under, well, actually, I should say seems to be, it is under control in Singapore. So now that more people are, transitioning back, what are some of the ways they can?
Yep. Okay, interesting question, because Singaporeans are a bit more protected, right? We have a efficient government. So we have 0 cases for at least for a week already. Now, unfortunately, the economy is a very global economy, right? For it to function, people have to travel and all that, and we are actually opening bubbles, and we tried, yeah, and the day before we have to close it back up again. So eventually it will go to that phase. When we just now we talked about how business was more willing to take risks to make sure business sustains. What they've done is they've over-provisioned, they've exposed a larger attack surface for bad actors, and when they come back to the office, they will probably be plugging back into the network and then probably need to top up their Bitcoin account, right? So what they could do to prepare is, number one, is to enforce their end device security. So make sure that there is a process to make sure that every machine gets plugged into the system is definitely cleared. Get their IGA in place to prepare for it. And of course, IGA, I mean identity governance and access management. And basically, the most important thing is to ensure that the access management is up to par. One of the things that they, in my opinion, they should do is, everybody has an AD, right? Everybody logs on through the AD, Active Directory. And one of the ways is, of course, to actually scan the AD and report on accesses that are rogue or should not have those high privilege accounts, and manage those first before people come in. So once they log on, the privilege are removed and then reinstated through an IGA process. The other thing that you should do is also, of course, to lock down their privileged password access to make sure that all IDs could be compromised. Credential can be compromised, but you need to have another gate. So if it is compromised, they still do not have access to the servers because of a privileged access management controls. That's one aspect. But the most important aspect is, of course, protection. Singaporeans kiasu, right? So the most important aspect is, should you be compromised, how are you going to recover? So we've heard about the MERS line where the Active Directory was throughout the whole world was compromised. And what saved them was a server that happened to sit in a data center that had a power failure, and they actually shipped the server back to recover, and yet it took months to recover. The same thing happened in some companies in Taiwan a couple of months ago, and they should look into a solution that help them to recover as quickly as possible, because it is always inevitable. One day you will get it kind of situation. Yeah. So they should look into those solutions now before they bring the workforce back into the organizations. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Eddie, for all those insights. Thanks for helping us understand better.
Yep.
Nice to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Safely and simply access the connected world. Enable exceptional digital experiences with no compromised security, privacy, and compliance. A single platform for all your identity and access management challenges for customers, employees, and things. From the simplest to the most complex to the largest scale, implement your way, quickly and easily. Utilize the power of digital identity and make user experiences easy. Because we know being able to connect with everyone and everything is key to creating a successful business. ForgeRock. Access the future.
This has been a fantastic session. A big thank you to Ivan, Ajay, Serkan, and Eddie for your expert advice. I thank you as well to everyone at home or if you're in your office. Thank you for tuning in to us and taking the time out. Hope you gleaned lots of insights from today's sessions. If you have any questions, please fill them into the chat box and our speakers will try to get back to you within 24 hours. On behalf of the Tay Group, stay safe and have a great day.